My name is Vrail 9, Senior Observer for the Galactic Oversight Bureau, Sector 7 Omicron, and I am writing this account because someone needs to document exactly how the most powerful governing body in the known universe managed to humiliate itself in front of a species that, only 43 rotations ago, was still arguing about whether or not their politicians should be allowed to own boats. I want the record to be clear. I want the timestamps preserved. And I want it absolutely understood that I warned them. Nobody listened to me, of course. Nobody ever listens to Vrail 9. It began, as most catastrophic failures of bureaucratic judgment do, with a memo. The Galactic Council had received Earth's third official communication in as many cycles, each one escalating in what the humans apparently called tone. The first message had been polite, almost embarrassingly so, requesting that the Council reconsider its decision to reroute the Hynoran trade corridor directly through Earth's outer asteroid belt, a decision made without consulting Earth, without notifying Earth, and, as far as I can tell, without anyone on the Council actually locating Earth on a map beforehand. The second message had been less polite. There was a phrase in it that our translation matrix initially refused to render, and when the senior linguist finally approved the override, the phrase turned out to be a rather vivid suggestion about where the Council could store its rerouting proposal. Several delegates found it offensive. Councillor Breathavon of the Sorvani Collective found it hilarious and had to be escorted from the chamber. The third message was simply a countdown. No explanation. No demands. No negotiation. Just a number. Ticking down from 72 of their hours. Clearly a bluff, announced Grand Arbiter Sulistoa, settling her forearms into a formal cross position that meant she had already decided and was not interested in further input. Sulistoa was an impressive creature, 2.5 meters of iridescent exoskeleton and centuries of accumulated political experience. And she was, in my professional assessment, about to make the single worst decision in Council history. These Earthlings have no fleet capability beyond their own solar system. They have no allies on record. They have no leverage. The countdown is psychological theater. Grand Arbiter, I said, because someone had to, I would like to formally submit my observation report regarding the humans. You submitted it 3 cycles ago, Vrail 9. Yes, and nobody read it. A pause. The kind of pause that, in Council chambers, meant I was correct and everyone knew it and nobody was going to say so. The Bureau's assessment, Sulistoa said carefully, was noted. It was filed under pending, I said, in the subfolder labeled Low Priority Species, which, I want to know for the record, is a folder I personally created a formal complaint about after the Turek incident, which was also a species we classified as low priority right up until they dismantled 2 of our relay stations using nothing but repurposed atmospheric mining equipment and what their own historians later described as, and I am quoting directly, a completely unreasonable amount of spite. Sulistoa's mandibles clicked together. The sound of a Grand Arbiter who was choosing, very deliberately, not to respond to a point she could not refute. The observation report she had not read was 37 pages long. I had written it myself, after spending 8 cycles embedded on Earth as part of the standard passive monitoring protocol. 8 cycles watching these small, fragile, objectively ridiculous bipeds go about their lives. 8 cycles of growing, creeping, deeply unsettling respect. The report's executive summary read as follows. Do not threaten these creatures. Do not dismiss these creatures. Do not, under any circumstances, give these creatures the impression that you believe they are incapable of following through on something. They will do it out of sheer principle even when it is objectively against their own interests, and they will do it with a level of creative problem-solving that suggests the concept of impossible functions for them primarily as a motivational tool. I had included 11 supporting case studies. I had included direct behavioral analysis. I had included a supplemental appendix titled, Plainly, they are not like the others. Please take this seriously. It was filed under pending. Low priority species. The countdown reached 60 hours when our long-range sensors picked up movement in the Sol system. Not a fleet, exactly. The humans did not have a fleet. What they had was, according to our sensor analyst Preet Valos, who delivered the report in a voice that had gone very quiet and very careful, a significant repurposing of civilian infrastructure. Define significant. said Solistoa. They have attached propulsion systems to 14 of their orbital platforms. Preet Valos said, they have loaded those platforms with what appears to be their entire stockpile of experimental long-range kinetic ordnance. They have Grand Arbiter also attached propulsion systems to 3 of their larger asteroid mining rigs, which they appear to fill with. He paused, checked his display, and then looked up with an expression that I recognized as the face of a being confronting information they had not emotionally prepared for. Compressed helium-3 fuel cells. A very large number of compressed helium-3 fuel cells. The chamber was quiet. That would, said Delegate Koru of the Mass Trade Syndicate, slowly, if ignited in proximity to the trade corridor. Yes, said Preet Valos. It would. They would also destroy a significant portion of their own outer system infrastructure, Solistoa said, and I could hear, underneath the authority in her voice, the first faint note of something she had not planned to feel. Uncertainty. Grand Arbiter. I said, very quietly, I believe that is the point. She turned to look at me then, all 4 arms unfolding from the formal cross position, an involuntary movement, the posture of someone whose model of a situation had just collapsed. They would damage themselves, she said. Not a challenge. Almost a question. Significantly, I confirmed. They know that. They built the devices anyway. They launched them anyway. The countdown is not psychological theater, Grand Arbiter. It is a schedule. The chamber erupted. Voices, tones, frequencies all overlapping in 17 different languages, every delegate speaking at once. And through all of it, I sat in my observer's chair and watched Solistoa's iridescent exoskeleton shift through 3 different colors in rapid succession, which, for a species, indicated a state I had only ever read about in diplomatic crisis literature. The word, roughly translated, meant, I made an error of catastrophic proportion, and I am only now understanding the full shape of it. The countdown read 51 hours. I opened my report to page 1 and slid it across the table to the Grand Arbiter. She began to read. Page 1 of my report contained a single quote, pulled directly from an Earth historical archive. A human military strategist, dead for several centuries by their reckoning, had written it during one of their many, many wars. The quote read, the supreme art war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. I had included it not because the humans followed this philosophy. I had included it because they understood it perfectly, had read it, had studied it, had taught it in their institutions for generations, and then had looked at it thoughtfully and concluded that sometimes the more effective move was to make absolutely certain your enemy understood that you were entirely prepared to fight, that you had done the math on fighting, that you had made peace with the cost of fighting, and that you were, at this precise moment, 47 hours away from, demonstrating all of the above in a manner that would take 3 centuries and a dedicated salvage operation to fully clean up. Solistoa read page 1, then page 2. Then she skipped ahead to the appendix titled, They're Not Like the Others. Please take this seriously. And I watched her exoskeleton cycle through 4 more colors in the span of 30 seconds. Vrail 9, she said, without looking up. Grand Arbiter, this section here, where you describe their historical pattern of, and I am reading your exact words, weaponizing inconvenience as a strategic doctrine. Yes. You give 17 examples. There were more. I edited for length. She set the report down. She looked at the display showing the sensor feed from the Sol system, where 14 orbital platforms and 3 asteroid mining rigs were drifting with quiet, patient purpose toward the Hynoran trade corridor at speed that suggested the humans had done the fuel calculations very carefully and arrived at the most economical velocity for a statement rather than a sprint. There was something almost meditative about it. Unhurried, certain. Open a communication channel to Earth, Solistoa said. The chamber went silent in the specific way that large groups of beings go silent when they collectively realize that the situation has moved into a phase that none of the procedural guidelines actually cover. Grand Arbiter, said Delegate Irvain of the Palesi Concordat, who had been loudest among those calling the countdown a bluff and who now appeared to be studying the ceiling with great intensity. Perhaps we should first convene a subcommittee to assess the appropriate. Open the channel, Solistoa repeated. The channel opened. The human who appeared on the display was not what most of the council had expected. The delegates who had bothered to form any mental image of Earth's representative had apparently pictured something more dramatic, a military figure, perhaps someone in a uniform bristling with insignia, projecting coordinated menace. Several delegates had, I later learned, expected dramatic music. What they got was a woman named Daria Osei, director of the Earth Coordinated Response Division, seated at a desk that had a half-finished cup of something hot and steaming next to her left hand. She had the look of a person who had been awake for a very long time and had long since passed to the phase of being tired about it. She looked, in short, like someone who had a schedule and intended to keep it. "Council," she said. Her voice was pleasantly neutral. The pleasantly neutral voice of someone who had decided the time for unpleasant voices was not yet necessary, but had it available if needed. "Director Osei," said Solistoa, and I give the Grand Arbiter full credit, because her voice carried almost none of the colors her exoskeleton was still cycling through. "We are contacting you regarding the current situation in your outer system. The situation we created," Daria Osei said, not aggressive, simply accurate. "Yes, regarding that situation, the Council wishes to open a dialogue." "We opened 3 dialogues," Osei said and picked up her cup. "The first one you ignored. The second one you filed somewhere. The third one," she glanced briefly at something off-screen, "you have 44 hours to respond to." "We are responding now," Solistoa said. "You are?" Osei agreed. I noticed the response required 14 of our orbital platforms and approximately 800 compressed fuel cells to prompt. "I want that noted." "It is noted," I said, loudly enough to be picked up by the channel, because I felt very strongly that someone should be noting things honestly, and I had been in this business long enough to know it would not be one of the delegates currently examining the ceiling. Osei looked toward the sound of my voice with an expression that, on a human face, I had learned to identify as a very controlled version of mild surprise. "Is that the Bureau Observer?" "Vrail 9. "It is," I said. "We read your monitoring report," she said. "The version you filed with the Bureau Public Archives 6 cycles ago." I became aware that Solistoa had turned to look at me. "You filed it publicly." Osei continued. "We thought it was thorough. We appreciated the footnote about the Turek incident." She paused. "We found it instructive." "I am gratified," I said carefully, while also becoming aware that approximately 30 council delegates were now also looking at me, and that the collective emotional temperature of the chamber had shifted in a direction that I would professionally classify as pointed. What followed was 4 hours of negotiation. Real negotiation. Not the ceremonial kind the council usually staged for species. It considered manageable. Solistoa conceded the trade corridor reroute. The council agreed to 3 things formally and 2 things informally that I am not authorized to detail in this account, but which I will simply describe as significant. Earth agreed to stand down its platforms. The fuel cells remained where they were, which Osei described as a practical storage solution, and which everyone in the chamber understood to mean something else entirely. At the conclusion of the negotiation, Delegate Irvain, perhaps feeling that something needed to be said, ventured that Earth had driven a very hard bargain. Daria Osei looked at him for a moment with an expression so thoroughly composed it functioned as its own category response. "We sent 3 messages," she said. "We were not bargaining. We were informing." The channel closed. The chamber sat with that for a while. I collected my report from the table in front of Solistoa. The 37 pages, still warm from her reading them at last. 43 rotations and 3 diplomatic crises too late. I straightened the pages. I filed them in my case. "Vrail 9, the Grand Arbiter said, as I stood to leave. Grand Arbiter. A long pause. The pause of a being who was weighing the cost of the next sentence against the cost of not saying it. "Revise the Earth classification," she said. "Remove it from low priority. What classification should I assign?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "Use your judgment," she said. I considered that for a moment. I thought about 14 orbital platforms moving at economical speed toward a trade corridor. I thought about 3 mining rigs loaded with 800 fuel cells. I thought about a woman with a half-finished hot drink and a schedule she intended to keep. I thought about 17 examples of weaponizing convenience, edited down for more. I thought about the footnote in my own report that none of them had read. The one at the very bottom of page 37. The one I had almost cut for space and then decided keep, which read simply, "They are patient right up until they are not. Plan accordingly." I opened the classification file. I created a new category. I labeled it with what I felt was appropriate precision. Handle with respect, not caution. There's a difference. I saved the file, closed my case, and walked out of the chamber. Behind me, I heard 31 delegates begin talking at once. And for first time in 8 cycles of professional observation, I allowed myself something my report had described in the humans as a defining behavioral trait. I smiled. They would figure out eventually. They always do. The ones who survive long enough to file the paperwork.